Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, July 11, 2023. Tonight's topic is an open forum. So that's generally where we take questions from the audience. You can always submit questions, suggestions, anything you want to share with us via our email address at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Tonight, I have something a little bit different, what I'm calling a subtopic. I only have one pre-submitted question that came in between now and the last time that I broadcast. So I'm going to get to that one first. Any of the live audience members that have a pressing question, I encourage you to get it in now, because after that, I'm going to go to this subtopic where I talk about something I'm really excited to share with you. I'm going to read to you a children's book, if I have time. If I don't do it tonight, I'm going to do it in the subsequent broadcast that talk about attachment theory with a kind of clarity and a way I think to understand what it is and how it works in ways that I haven't even heard the masters talk about and describe. So with that, let me get to the first pre-submitted question, and then I'll see if there are any live questions that come after that and get into that or the subtopic. My first question, the pre-submitted question that we have in our files says this. My 14-year-old daughter is at home while my 16-year-old daughter is at Evoke. My 14-year-old is getting letters from her sister that are pretty tough and a complete contrast to what she writes us. Can you give us guidance on how to talk to the 14-year-old, and should we edit the letters to her? My 16-year-old was very divisive at home, and some of the reasons we believe she needs to work on having a better relationship. The first thing that comes to mind, I like that we allow students to write to different people, to write to siblings, sometimes with some therapists in some situations, even to write to boyfriends or girlfriends, or to write to friends eventually at home. And part of that is because everything goes through the parents. They become the gatekeeper of all of these letters. I love for you all and for us to see the contrast, because often the conscious material, if you will, the stuff that's on the surface is of the least amount of interest to us as therapists. We want to understand what's going on beneath the surface. And so getting a glimpse into what's going on beneath the surface by hearing a different letter with a much different tone and a much different message, what it does for us, it doesn't answer the questions, but it causes us to raise questions. So the first thing I would say before I talk about your 14-year-old at home is I think it's important for you and for the therapist at Evoke to become curious. Get curious about why there's such a contrast between those. And even though sometimes these letters to siblings in this case or to a friend might be categorized as negative, they can be valuable for us because we're getting some different aspects, some honesty that we might not be getting in the letters that are written directly to the parent, directly to you. Having said all of that, and more specifically to your question, what I would say is I think it's okay to edit the letters if you're trying to protect the daughter that's at home. I think it's fine to edit them. Maybe more than edit them, I would say not give them to them at all, because I wouldn't want them to get a letter that they didn't know was edited, and without you putting you in a position where you're bound to not tell the truth about it. So I think it's, for me, I'm just talking off the cuff. It's more about either choosing to give her the letters or not. And I think you're well within your rights as a parent to choose if it's going to be harmful or burdening to the daughter at home. And if that was, I mean, the daughter at home has the same rights, I suppose I could say, to the relief from the chaos, from the negativity, from the anger outbursts, whatever it was that was going on at home. She has the same right to the relief that parents sometimes enjoy in these volatile situations with children who are causing all kinds of chaos. So I think it's okay to edit them up to the stage of saying I'm just not going to give them to them. And then the second thing is, I would say, is ask both of them questions. Right? It's hard for me to answer with a specific directive as it applies to the 14-year-old or the 16-year-old, because I want to hear from them first. How does this feel to you? Well, what's your reaction? Is this a burden? Asking the daughter who's writing the letters. I want to know, just from a place of curiosity, why there's a stark contrast in the tone and the content of the letters that you're writing to us and that you're writing to your sisters. And then, of course, giving if the therapist hasn't read them, because we often will just give letters straight to the parents. Again, acknowledging, and this is very important, that the parent has the legal and in our experience, the ethical right to be the gatekeeper for the letters that come home. But so share that message and concern or question, I guess, with the evoke therapist so that they can go back to your child, not only with your letters in hand asking those same questions, but they can ask those questions. Why is it that you're saying one thing to one person and one thing to another? And again, there's no accusation there. It's just from a place of curiosity, because part of what we're trying to do in psychotherapy, broadly speaking, is find the story that is untold. I just shared a quote today from Carl Jung, who said that most patients that come to psychiatry, in his case, that come to the psychiatrist, have a story that is untold, that only they know and that they're afraid to tell to anybody. And part of the task of the therapist is to find that story. And I really think that that's our job. He later goes on to explain that diagnoses can be helpful to the therapists because it gives them a certain context and vantage point. It's kind of shorthand for what's going on. But diagnoses aren't helpful for the patient or the client themselves. It's really the story and unraveling that story, unpacking that story that create the healing process for the client. So with that backdrop in mind, find the story, find where it makes sense, understand what's going on, present that back to your children. But I want to empower you. Most simply, to address your question, it's quite all right not to give those letters to your 14-year-old if you deem that's going to be harmful or a burden to the 14-year-old, if it's going to be emotionally painful for them or difficult for them. You have the right. That's part of why your child is at evoke, is because some of what they've been doing, I'm sure, has been, like you described it in your question itself, has been hurtful to the daughter, has been detrimental to the daughter and to her relationships. So before I can even answer, and maybe you'll give me a two-parter, come back with curiosity. Come back in your responses in your letters. Come back to the evoke therapy with questions, and through your letters and through the therapist, ask questions of the 16-year-old, and then ask questions of your 14-year-old at home about how he, or I think you said she feels about those letters, those kinds of messages. Great question, though. Somebody writes, my 16-year-old daughter does not seem to acknowledge her behavior to us in our letters. Should we be concerned about this? She just seems to act the same when we hear from her through letters and her calls. Again, I would probably replace the word concern with curiosity. That's not unusual. Sometimes I ask parents to write a follow-up to that initial letter, that hopes and intentions letter, where they ask difficult and tough questions of the child about previous behaviors. I think that's okay. Again, it's not about being punitive. It's not about being shaming or guilting, but it's about curiosity. What's going on for her? And part of what I assume is that her aversion to it is about shame. Right? That's my assumption, is that lack of acknowledgement about what he's. I mean, that's what we all deal with. We're all at times resistant to being accountable for our behaviors and their impact on others because of the shame we feel. And so that's a delicate line to walk with your child, about asking for honesty, asking for accountability, being curious about the lack of it, and ultimately not putting on so much pressure that it's coming from a shaming or a punitive or an overpowering place. But concerned, I wouldn't be concerned. That's par for the course. That's very, very, very common. But these kinds of examples about things that are inconsistent, that might concern parents, are very important to discuss with a therapist. And through your letters, like I said with the last question, through your letters and through the therapist, to be able to ask the child in the wilderness, writing those letters, questions. But this reminds me of a question that I've heard in years past, where parents say they're what my child was saying and doing at home, usually the kinds of behaviors that led to them being sent to the program, and now we see their letters in wilderness therapy, being very positive, being very remorseful, being very positive, it's important to ask, why is there such a contrast? Again, for everybody, to the child. And to, even if the child is unwilling to, because again, it might be difficult or feel too vulnerable, too risky, or because they're unable to, because it's in the unconscious. They're not aware of the difference. It's incredibly important as a treatment team, and you're part of the treatment team. It's incredibly important to ask and answer those questions on a week to week basis, to be developing hypotheses and testing them out with all the data that you're getting. And that's really our job, is week after week after week making assessments. Sometimes behavior that happens towards the end of their stay in wilderness stand out as very positive or very negative. And we don't simply place value on positive and negative in those terms, but it can be very illuminating. Why did you go through 8 or 9 weeks with this message, and then on week 10 we hear this? Or you earn the privilege of writing your friends or your girlfriend or boyfriend, and we hear a very different message. To be curious about that, to understand it, because I think that the answers to those curiosities, those questions, I think that give you a more complete picture of the child. And one of the things that I want to say very clearly is, in at Evoke, with the attachment-based approach that we work on and work through, it's very important to understand, to consider the idea that the conscious stuff, the stuff that is said on the surface, is just the proverbial tip of the iceberg. And I'm not talking about overt conscious manipulation, but it's the unconscious material that we're trying to unpack, to uncover. And we need to create a certain amount of safety so that the child become a willing co-explorer with us on that journey. So that's my thought about that one. Great question. Next question. Somebody asks, my son attended Evoke a couple of years ago and had a very positive experience. After Evoke, he attended a therapeutic boarding school, empathizing anxiety treatment. Before spending 2 years in high school with a strong support system. However, he never got the connection that he got with his therapist, his wilderness leader at Evoke. Why isn't there some aftercare relations? Why isn't there some aftercare relations or ongoing therapy with students that have progressed from the program? Well, we do have coaches available, so that is an option. I'll just pull up that page that I share on the slides all the time. Many of our current Evoke therapists have coaching options and openings. And the if you're watching this live, you see a screenshot of about 40 or so therapists. I think we were up to about 45 therapists that work in our coaching program, who will work with children and families and adults that have nothing to do with our wilderness therapy program going forward. So that is an option. It's very hard to recreate the kind of energy that happens in wilderness therapy. I find wilderness therapy to be a wonderful facilitator of building the therapeutic relationship. And I could go on about this because of my love and my history and experience in wilderness therapy, but bringing them food, as simple as that, bringing them out something when the therapist visits, being able to not just teach them about therapeutic ideas, but teaching them about wilderness therapy and the nomadic model. Already you're starting to establish a relationship where the child is being nurtured. I started gardening a few years ago, vegetable garden a few years ago. I'm by no means an expert, a very, very novice. But I find my time watering the vegetables in the evening, I often find that meditative, or in the morning meditative. Right. And I can feel the nurturing influence. So wilderness therapy is a context where we're taking care of them physically. We're teaching them about wilderness living. And so there's a bond, there's a trust, there's an appreciation, there's a nurturing adult to child relationship that gets established in those contexts. And you can kind of borrow on that capital when you're doing therapy. But my simple answer is, we do have therapists that do ongoing coaching. And I call it coaching. It's across state lines. It's not therapy because it's not in state, but it's virtual. And so there is that option And then if the question is speaking to the fact that why at subsequent programs, residential treatment centers or therapeutic boarding schools, is there not that same kind of magic, or it's not as dynamic, or it's not, it doesn't feel as powerful of a bond, is because wilderness therapy, it does that. Wilderness therapy creates a situation. I'll tell this quick little story about a therapist who went away and worked at a residential treatment center and then came back to work with us. And when he came back, he brought 2 clients with him from his residential program. He did that because everybody agreed that they weren't quite ready to go home, but it didn't make sense for them to have a new therapist. And he had spent some time working with them, kind of preparing them for the transition. And it just felt better for everybody involved that they come back and finish in wilderness therapy with him before going home. So that was the plan. And he told this story one evening in clinical meeting. We used to have our clinical meetings at the end of our field week on Wednesday evening. And he tells the story about this student that he was working with who exhibited often throughout his residential stay, the program he was previously at, he exhibited a power struggle. And at one point in their wilderness visit, and that week's visit, the therapist felt the power struggle, the game playing. He felt it starting to build. And he just thought to himself, you know what? This is not a good use of my time. I'm going to extricate myself from the session. I'm going to walk away and I'll meet with him when he's ready. And he said to the young man sitting across from me, he said, you know, we don't have to meet this week. Doesn't sound like you're really open to talking about anything that's real. And so I'll talk to you next week, and started to pull away. And the young man said, no, don't go. Don't go. I'll talk to you. Right. I'll get real with you, because there was a vulnerability. There was something about the model that made him feel like the connection was important beyond the therapy itself. So again, you borrow on that capital. And he said to us as a group listening to this is several years ago, he said, I realize now more than I ever have that the wilderness is the co-therapist, that it does something that you cannot quite replicate in any other setting, especially outpatient therapy, but any other setting, even those that attempt to do it through a residential program. So another question comes up. It says, my 14-year-old daughter is not exhibiting the behaviors that evoke that led her to be in the program, so it's proving difficult to decide on what happens next when she leaves the program. 2 thoughts. Wait. You know, that's part of the therapist's job, is to challenge them. But part of the challenge is, and again, I would defer to your therapist for sure, but I want to put this thought in your mind to discuss with your therapist. Write a letter saying just that. Saying, I want to understand why it looked so differently, why it looks so different at home. Maybe it's the simple behavioral reinforcers that happen in wilderness that's keeping her behaving this way. Right? Maybe it's maybe there is some kind of awakening, some kind of epiphany that has happened. But I've seen this a lot of times, and I will tell you, the truth is usually somewhere in between. In other words, the most likely behavior going forward is probably somewhere in between the old behavior and the behavior that you're seeing at Evoke. And again, just like the other 2 questions on the similar topic, it becomes our job to bring this back to the child, to bring this back to the student, to work with the therapist, to explain, for lack of a better phrase, where the truth is, where the authenticity is. And to explain, it's like when you see something on objective testing and you see something very different in real time in the natural observations. It's not a bad thing. It's just, it takes a little bit more effort to construct a conceptualization. And that's part of our job, to create a conceptualization that explains the difference, that explains the contrast. So I don't know why it's happening specifically with your daughter, with your child, but I do know that that's not uncommon. And I do know that that becomes a point of emphasis for me as a therapist. Can become, I would suggest you to strongly consider and talk to the therapist, becomes a point of emphasis in your letters, the parents' letters. And of course becomes a point of emphasis in the therapist's work. Sometimes I put those students on phone calls earlier with their parents. I let them write friends earlier than I would. Sometimes children never earn that privilege to write friends. Sometimes I put them on the phone call with their parents without anybody observing it, just anybody listening in on the conversation. I give them more and more freedom to better approximate, replicate what being home would be like in terms of the lack of supervision, more freedom, more privileges, and see how they deal with that. But time is a factor. You just wait and see. And more than anything, I would share with you my experience that I'm not surprised when a child is able to turn it on for a period of several weeks. That shows me that's a good sign. That means there is some mental health, there is some capacity there. There are students, and I haven't thought about telling you this tonight, but I will here now. There are students, plenty of them, who can't even fake it. And I want you to know that. Maybe they would say, aren't willing to fake it. And that's a different personality. That's a different constellation of issues, right? I've had students say to me, I could fake it, but I don't want to. I could fake it like all the rest of these guys, but I don't want to. And I would say to them sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes I would just thank them for not faking it, right? Just go with the resistance. But sometimes I would say to them, could you fake it for 24 hours and just show me? Just as an exercise. And of course, in those instances when I asked for that, there was never, almost virtually ever, any ability to fake it. And that they were just so dysregulated that they had the illusion that it was within their will or their willpower. But they were so easily and often triggered and dysregulated that they weren't able to treat peers with respect, to cooperate in a group setting, to make the group work, to participate in letter writing or therapy assignments in a meaningful way. So again, get curious. Somebody writes this question. Do you have any insight as to why my son is so hateful towards me? I read it was to show how he feels, to hurt me, so I feel his feelings. He is adopted. Yesterday, he said I wasn't his real mother. I was worthless. He prayed I died and that he raised himself. None of this is accurate, but is painful to hear. He is nice to other people, and I've been nothing but compassionate and give him space. He said he doesn't have respect for me, and I agree he doesn't. He has the right to be angry, and I told him that he does. But yesterday he said he was sorry for abusing me verbally, and I said it wasn't okay, and he said that it is how he is, and that's what he does. So where do we go from here? He's abusive, and I am not accepting sorry when he is abusive to me, when he can't handle his issues and won't talk to anybody. A lot of stuff in here. Again, like I've said to the others with the other questions in the other contexts, our job as psychotherapists is to find the story, your job too, as parents in the long run, is to find the story where all of their behavior makes sense. That's the simplest answer that I can give. Because in some context, in some story, and it could be something as something as tangential as neurology, the hormones, right? It could be trauma that you have nothing to do with. It could be projective identification, as you've guessed, that he wants you to feel how he feels. It could be transferring from the parents who gave him up to you who adopted. It could be, and this is the most difficult one to see, it could be that he doesn't feel like he can be heard by you when he shares things more assertively. There's a quote from Martin Luther King that I borrow and extrapolate the issue from, where he says that violence, or a riot specifically, a riot is the language of the unheard. Jamie Gill says in one of her books that violence is most often a last resort when a person feels powerless. Sometimes people have certain diagnoses and personality constructs where boundaries create rage. Is that the construct? Is that the personality constellation that causes him to feel rage when you set a boundary because it triggers some sense of some abandonment fear, some abandonment wound in there. There's a whole lot of things. But the beauty of this is this. The beauty of this is you have a right, like you said, to keep your boundaries. When I talk about listening, when I talk about understanding, when I talk about containing, and that's the clinical word for all of that, I'm not suggesting to any person, any parent on earth that they must subject themselves to somebody else's abuse. It's really important that we not let our empathy or our desire to understand another person and their dilemma, we not let our empathy or our understanding of others rob us of our boundaries. You can do both at the same time. You can say, I won't allow myself to be treated this way, and I do have compassion. And those aren't exclusive of each other. So you are empowered by me and hopefully by every parent that you talk to, by every therapist that you talk to. I hope that you're empowered to draw your line in the sand, to take care of yourself. Now that we've established that piece of the equation, that piece of the puzzle, now we go back to curiosity. And the one thing that you would have control over, the one thing you would have control over, where it would be about you, his feedback, his resistance to you, if you were a terrible listener, if you were a poor listener, if you're emotionally manipulative, if everything has to look happy and good at the end, if you have a hard time because of your ego of listening to difficult feedback, if you have a hard time maintaining boundaries and letting the child feel whatever they're feeling. Now, feeling what you're feeling and punching somebody in the nose are two completely different things. Calling somebody names and attacking them is not feeling angry or sad or scared or frustrated. Right? It's nonsensical. It's ridiculous to say that's just how I am and that's just how I feel. Because those are different things. But part of the question becomes, not knowing you, not knowing your child. My question is, does he get listened to adequately? Have you, like it says in the subtitle of my second book, have you learned to love your horrible, rotten self? In other words, have you accepted your own flaws and faults, your own limited capacity to listen, your own gaslighting behaviors, so that this rage that you feel is really a reaction to those things? I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it is, but that is a rock that we pick up and look under, that we explore. But in the end, and this is true of all of your children, of all of our children, of all the people that we care about, of all people in general, it's not our job to catch a fish for them, borrowing from the old adage about teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish. It's not our job, your job, to catch the fish in the long run. It's our job to teach them how to fish. And what is the fish in this analogy? It's feelings. Feeling what you're feeling and learning to cope with those emotions. And if you have something that's more compromising of a personality, of a neurology, it's going to be more challenging and difficult. Yes, we look at adoption when there's adoption. We look at divorce when there's divorce. Obviously, we look at overt examples of abuse or bullying or learning disabilities. We look at all the usual suspects when we're trying to find the story that's hidden inside of the child. Absolutely. But in the end, in a fundamental, spiritual, psychologically sound way, the job is for the child to figure out how they feel and for the child to learn to tell this story to us. We develop hypotheses, but we're hoping that the child can discover and tell that story themselves. So set your boundaries, get curious, be willing to look at yourself and your contribution. I always teach people that when somebody has a hard time telling the truth in a respectful way, and respectful there's a little bit of leeway in respect. Like, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to raise your voice a little bit, right? That's people are human. I'm not talking about overt abuse and name calling and swearing and threatening behaviors or stances or language. I'm not talking about that, but within a certain range that you get to decide. I don't. Give them space to feel it and see if that can be the thing that breaks through. I'll just say one last thing. And in fact, I'm going to do a couple of broadcasts about this issue. That's how expansive it is, coming up in the next couple of months. Part of when I hear children maintain a certain level of anger or resentment for the intervention of wilderness therapy or residential treatment or anything for that matter with their parents, oftentimes I find, almost always I find, that there's definitely a challenge for the parents to let their children feel what they feel. And that's really what the child is angry about. We call this, sometimes it's called complex trauma or process trauma. It's not the thing that happened to you, because crappy, painful stuff happens to everybody, some more, some less, but everybody experiences some kind of trauma. But that's not the great predictor about if that trauma lives in the body and becomes symptomatic, becomes pathogenic, part of a diagnosis, part of an addiction. That's not the predictor. The predictor is there some way, some pathway for that child with an adult in their life to be able to feel that digest, metabolize the feelings that come from that trauma. In other words, saying it more simply, it's not the thing that's happened to you, it's the support that you get in dealing with that thing. So that's the question. That's one of the rocks that I look under when I hear questions like this is there a pattern in the family where this is his last resort to get his anger out because it's being repressed all the time. So the quickest way to help a child move through their emotions is to give them a safe place to feel it. But a lot of parents, a lot of people want children not to be angry, not to be sad, not to be hurt. Understandable, right? We can all understand that desire, that impulse. But those very energies that want a child not to feel what they're feeling, unpleasant as it might be, those are the very energies that lead to or help contribute to the child becoming full of rage, pushing away, becoming abusive. It doesn't explain all of it in all situations, but that's one of the places to look. The Drama of the Gifted Child and the broadcasts that I've done on it is where I would point you to as a foundation to start looking at that piece of it. Thank you. Great question with lots of really important issues. Somebody writes, upon coming home, if boundaries are set such as the child must attend school each day, but then they have school refusal because they say their stomach hurts, which is due to anxiety and not physical sickness, how do you enforce the boundary that they must attend school if they flat out refuse? No doubt the anxiety causes the stomach to hurt, but they need to go regardless. Question mark. It's that question mark that gets me most curious about your question. The question mark at the end. No doubt the anxiety causes the stomach to hurt, but maybe they need to go to regardless. I think part of the question that I would give to the family, to you parents, in considering such examples is, what else can we do? What else is available? And I've said this to my daughter who struggles with some of the things you're describing. I've said, what do you have in mind? Is it boarding school, traditional boarding school? Um, we've offered one of the non-traditional schools in our area. I've heard other people move their children to online schools. I'm not telling you to take these alternative paths, but I'm asking all of you in the family and in the system to explore them and explore some of them with the child. Because imagine this. Imagine fast forward 10 years that we find out that the child has some processing issues, some learning difference, some learning styles, some constellation of personality factors that would have been best served in a different kind of context than a traditional school. We can all imagine examples like that, and it would be a real missed opportunity to not explore it. Now, with our 15-year-old, our fourth child, we've come up with something very unique, very alternative for her. And this last semester, she got on the honor roll for the first time in her academic career. And you might wonder, what was the thing that we decided? And it's radical, and I'm not recommending it to anybody. But we decided she didn't have to go to school or graduate from high school if she didn't want to. I've shared this a couple of times. I have a PhD. My wife has a master's degree. My oldest child has a master's degree. My second oldest child has is finishing her doctoral degree. My third child is a senior at a wonderful university. And then I have my fourth child. So we came to this conclusion that we weren't going to fight this battle, that the stakes, that the symptoms around her anxiety were so significant and potentially damaging that we were going to start with no assumptions. And I said to her, we came to the conclusion as parents, you don't have to go to school. You can skip any day that you want. And when you turn 18, you're going to have to figure out how to support yourself. Again, I'm not recommending that to one single human being on earth. This is based on our family, our history, and my specific daughter, who's very, very intelligent, in many ways very scrappy, very feisty, but struggles with some of the issues that you're describing. And this was the first year that we did it, this last school year. And she got the best grade she's ever had, and she made some national scholarship groups. And she missed a lot of school. The most concerning thing of this experiment of thinking outside of the box was how much school she could actually miss and get A's. That concerned me more than anything. But we saw that she was the youngest of 4 kids, and that with her intelligence and her certain kind of grit and feistiness, we thought that the power struggle would be too destructive, and to force the square peg, if you will, into the round hole was too damaging and too dangerous. So we went this alternative path. And you know, I tell this story with a great outcome, but I was willing to accept the other outcome. As I've said the previous 2 or 3 times I've shared this on the broadcast, I wasn't willing to wait till she was laying down on a hospital gurney to reprioritize education. Just because the educational system is, there's a mainstream system in our country, in our society, doesn't mean that it's right for everybody. So I probably made the problem worse for you, giving my example with my family and my child. But the point is that you open it up. And I don't know. And I'll tell you this in conclusion to this question. I will tell you this. For most of you, if you're parenting intentionally, if you're parenting from your heart, if you're parenting from a place of your own healing and recovering, if you're parenting courageously, those are a lot of ifs, I know. But if you are parenting from those places, I will tell you this, you will get a lot of grief from a lot of people. A lot of people will tell you that you're doing it wrong. But here's what I've learned in my nearly 30 years of doing this. If the mainstream culture worked, we wouldn't have prisons as full as they are. We wouldn't have addiction as rampant as it is. We wouldn't have mental health issues as common as they are. So I would rather lose on my own terms. Now, again, some of the context is I do my own work. I've been to, I think, 9 intensives myself as a participant. I go to therapy every week, as does my wife. We both have been going to the same therapist for years over 20, many years over 20. 24 for me, 25 for her. So that's the context also, just to give you a snapshot. My wife and I have attended Codependence Anonymous on numerous occasions. She went for a much longer time than I did. Families Anonymous, Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon. We have that background. So it's not some some decision that we made that was just to make our lives easier, to avoid conflict and avoid the difficulty. Wasn't that at all. It was taking a very complex, nuanced issue and trying to do something different. And for today, it has both the outcomes that we wanted, which are number one, my daughter's mental health is better today than it was a year ago. That's a fact. And number two, which is just icing on the proverbial cake, my daughter also excelled this year better than she's ever done in school. And by the way, it was her. And I'll just tell you this last little nugget. I had been trained by her because she had told me prior to this year that she doesn't know if she wants to go to college. She had shot the proverbial cannon across the bow, right? So coming into this year, midway through the year, I would talk about college and I'd say, I'm sorry, that might not be your choice. And I said that on a few occasions. And she stopped me after my third or fourth time of stopping myself. And she said, Dad, stop it. You know, I'm probably going to go to college, probably graduate school. So you don't need to say that anymore. So you see, there was something else at play besides her aversion to education, formal education, traditional education. There was something about the relationship. And maybe the best thing I will say is the best part about this year, I mean, obviously her mental health is the priority, but the best part of the academic success is that it was her, not us, that was monitoring it and making sure and nagging because of the online systems now that they have available for parents all over the country. It wasn't us nagging with every assignment, every tardy, every missed class, every late assignment. Somebody writes this. My 19-year-old daughter has been home since February after attending wilderness therapy and residential treatment for 11 months. Due to her inability to keep the home agreement, we gave her a period of time to cooperate with us, and she has not. This weekend, we are planning to move her out into a nearby basement apartment of ours. She has remained defiant, still refusing to do for herself, despite saying she knows she has to leave. She has moments saying she is not ready to be an adult, and it breaks my heart. But we are keeping our boundary, knowing that she is failing to launch from our home. Can you just offer me some words of support or any pearls of wisdom that I can hold on to as we approach this very challenging weekend? Wow. It's a really, really great question. And what makes it great is I don't have any simple answers. I think I would just tell you to have your heart and mind open as you do this, to feel what comes to you. This could, again, facilitate a different dynamic, a different exchange. And I just want to tell you this, mom or dad or both. I just want to tell you that uh, what you're doing, nobody can tell you what to do. Nobody can tell you the right thing to do. It's scary. It's really, really important for you to feel supported and empowered, to have people by your side that support you. And nobody knows, nobody's responsible. It lies on nobody else's shoulders but you. But remain open. Keep your heart and your mind open, and be open to the fact that, you know, she might pivot. This might create a change in her. And be willing and open to evolve the plan as it goes. And at the same time, be willing to follow through if nothing, no inspiration comes that's any different from that. Maybe a different kind of family therapy, a different quality of family therapy, of communication. Maybe you get to an underlying issue that hasn't been addressed so far. Maybe the pressure opens her up. I've just learned that I just don't know what people should do. And so all I've learned is to support everybody on their journey. Make sure that you're working with a therapist, a therapist that can help you with your parenting, help you with your own work, so that you know you're operating from a wise place, right? A healed or healing recovery place. But like I've said many times, parenting is an impossible assignment. It's impossibly difficult. And all parents who are putting in effort to try to figure it out deserve our respect and our compassion. So I don't know if that's the kind of encouragement that you wanted, but that's what comes to my mind and heart as I hear this. Somebody writes, my 17-year-old son seems to be thriving in only his third week in the program, and I'm curious on transitions back to home life at some point after treatments. Is there a time the student's journey that helps them to be clear-headed back into a normal environment or more at risk? The difference between the greatness of the wilderness and our home city is so drastic, it concerns me. I feel like you know what my next broadcast is. In fact, I'll just kind of swing to that at the bottom of the slide deck that I have. My next broadcast will be this Thursday night, less than 48 hours from now, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, on transitioning from wilderness, specifically transitioning home from wilderness. I will have a section on transitioning home from wilderness. So it is a great question. It is on my mind, and I will address it at length. I've done a few broadcasts on this already, but it's been a couple of years at least since I've done this. So, yeah, I think what I could say in short order is the same thing I said to the previous parent, which is wilderness therapy doesn't fix the kid. That's not the way we think about it. Wilderness therapy opens up the issues at hand, hopefully. Wilderness therapy begins to create a dynamic where parents understand the purpose of the symptoms. And hopefully the child understands the purpose of the symptoms. Wilderness therapy creates a bridge, a common language, a shared language between parents and child. Wilderness therapy helps the parents get on their healing and recovery process. Wilderness therapy gives parents the time to get clear and to work on the issues that beset them, the issues that come into play in their parenting journey. Wilderness therapy redirects the parent's energy toward fixing and working on their own project and not making the child the project. The child becomes almost, well, actually does become secondary to your healing. I will tell you all the great secret that I've learned. I learned it many years ago, but putting it to the test over the past 27 years or so, I've seen it to be true over and over and over and over again. And that is this. The real task is your peace and serenity. The real task is you working on and unhealing and unraveling your own history, your own childhood. Those tasks, if you will, set you up to see the child better and more clearly, and to be more equipped to give the child what they need to go where they need to go. You learn to let go of old expectations. You learn that there's no such thing as normal, and normal is horrible. You learn that sometimes the problem was that the child was a square peg in a round hole. You learn that the symptoms, when followed home like a trail of crumbs, that when you follow the symptoms, that there was a family dynamic that had previously been unaddressed. You learn that some of your childhood wounding, some of your childhood training is what the child was trying to break free from. You learn to let go in situations where children, after all that I've said and all that I've described, still maintain a self-destructive process. You've learned to discover what the author of the book, The Prophet, Khalil Gibran, said, which is your children are not your children. And you learn that the goal of parent education is not to change children, but it is to change parents, which of course has a wonderful impact on the child. It's a different sensibility. You'll meet people who have lost children of all ages. You'll meet people who have lost spouses, who have lost parents to addiction, to depression, and to suicide. You'll learn how they've grappled with it. And you'll learn in their grappling, in their wisdom, you'll learn some tools, some ideas, some concepts that will help you if you never get that, if you never have to experience that very, very sad and traumatic experience that they experienced. They'll come back with wisdom for you. If your child is dealing with something much less severe than the things that I just described, that doesn't mean that they don't have wisdom for you. The child doesn't need a perfect parent or they'd be doomed. But the child does need a parent who's working on themselves. The child needs the parent to switch the project from fixing the child to fixing themselves, which means finding your own serenity. If you walk into Al Anon, you will hear the slogan. If you walk into Codependence Anonymous, you will hear the slogan that says, "My serenity is my responsibility." You will learn of the toxicity of the idea that you're only as happy as your least happy child. You will learn how hurtful that is to the child, how that's evidence of your lack of growth and evolution, lack of awareness about what it means to love and be in relationship to another person. And you'll also learn compassion for yourself, because everything I'm describing this evening, every characteristic, every attribute, every lesson, I am still working on. So the hope doesn't come because I've arrived by any means. The hope comes because I've found meaning in my suffering. And the meaning of my suffering is that this life, being a therapist, being a father, working in this field with people who struggle, being married, that the meaning of all of that is to expand my own spiritual, psychological growth. And lastly, I'll just say that we come to realize, importantly, fundamentally, that the child is the magic potion. The child themselves is the medicine. The child is the teacher, not the other way around. And when you realize that these struggling children, these children in pain, these children that are suffering, when you realize that they are the teacher and you are the student, not the other way around, everything changes. And yes, I know that doesn't give you simple, concrete answers to implement tomorrow. I know that. But I tried that for 15 years. I tried that for the first 5 to 8 years of my broadcasts, because that's what I'd been taught. And it doesn't work that way. Read The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Read The Audacity to Be You. They're available on Amazon and Audible. Read them or listen to them. And try to take from them the lessons that the families, the hundreds and the thousands of families have taught me through their struggles and through their process. All right, folks, thanks for the questions. I'll just go over the upcoming announcements and slides. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, Finding You is that entryway, that springboard, that accelerator if you have some therapy experience. The August session is already full. The next option is September 20th, but we will open up a second one before then if we get the need. So September 20th is the next one that's open on the calendar. We also have an online one available. It's a third of the cost, half of the time, and you don't have to travel. July 14th, right around the corner, is that next offering. It goes from Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. So if you work outside of the home, you don't even have to miss any or a lot of work. We have a returning to you option that'll come this fall, October 25th through 29th, that I will be facilitating. That's anyone who's been through a Finding You. We have custom Finding Connection for couples and parents, and also Finding Family. So if you want to find out about our custom intensives, contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. We have support groups each week for our current families. July 13th is the next offering at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni meeting only for alumni only. July 25th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering for that. And then we have a once a month meeting for our intensive alumni. August 8th at 6 p.m. is the next offering. Go to evoketherapy.com/family-involvement to find out more. If you want to do a family trek, that's a multi-day wilderness family experience. You can even involve adventure activities. Contact admissions@evoketherapy.com. That can happen in the middle of the program, at the end of the program. That can happen completely separate from the program. Like I mentioned earlier, we have more than 40 coaches who are trained in the attachment-based model that can help parents, can help you with transitions, can help you with some of these difficult problems in real time. contact coaching@evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask, encourage, and implore all current families to try out to attend 6 of any of the combination of the following meetings: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org to find a Buddhist-inspired program, less of an emphasis on a higher power, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI.org has free classes and resources in your local communities. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to those applications and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. You'll find us there. You can also find us on soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there, or watch the Reed broadcast on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy programs or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter or Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. I should add Threads. You can find us on Threads using those same handles also. I'll add that going forward. We've joined that. Evoke Therapy Intensives is on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives, and on Facebook you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog on our website has wonderful content each week. What I love about our blog, it's not just instructions, it's not just sharing the research with you, but it's our staff and our therapists talking about their own journeys. See, if it applies to you as a parent to work on yourself, it applies to us as therapists to work on ourselves. And that's what I'm so proud of with our blog, is more of the blogs than not, almost all of them, in fact, talk about the lessons and the learnings that our staff and our therapists go through. If you want to give back for people that can't afford treatment and therapy, the 3 charitable partners that we work with are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast, as I mentioned earlier, will be in less than 48 hours. July 13th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about transitioning from wilderness, transitioning home from wilderness, and also transitioning to the next setting if it's not home from wilderness. So I'll be talking about that in 48 hours. Look forward to that. I haven't talked about that in at least a couple of years in its own broadcast. So thank you for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And for and on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thank you for showing up here and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days. Bye-bye.